Welcome to our webinar series on the psychology of eating. I'm Sarah Sims, an education and psychology assistant practitioner at West Hampshire Community Diabetes Service. And today we're going to focus on crushing those cravings, and that's using the power of habit to help ourselves towards healthy eating. So this may be a familiar situation to you. Many people find themselves in this place where they gain some knowledge about healthy eating and they make a plan and they know what they're meant to be doing, but they're finding it's just so hard to stick with. Those cravings won't leave them. The cake is still more tempting than the apple. So today we're taking a bit of a different approach to our other webinars and videos. We're going to be looking at how we can help ourselves to stick to those good intentions. And this involves looking a bit at how our brains work and how habits form and how we can work with our brains rather than against them. So before we plunge in, it's really useful, I think, to remind ourselves of where we've come from. We evolved tens of thousands of years ago in an environment like this, forest or the savannah. Food was very scarce, and when we could find it, we needed to eat it. So we have evolved to be driven to eat sugar, fatty and salty things. They're really attractive to us. Of course, the problem now is that we have still that primitive bit of our brain in a 21st century environment where we're surrounded by food temptation. But something that's really useful in that knowledge, I hope, is to remove some of the blame and shame around us about eating. It's really easy to feel like a bit of a failure if you're not sticking to your plan. I'm so weak. I just don't have the willpower. And I just want to remind you that it's not your fault. We still have that very strong drive in us to eat the stuff that isn't so good for us, the really calorie dense foods. And hopefully today will help you with that. So eating unhealthy things is really just another habit, and it might be useful to remind ourselves how habit forms. A habit that's good for us that we all do every day, brushing our teeth. Habits form when we have a cue, a trigger, and it might be waking up in the morning, stumbling towards the bath. And that cue leads to a behaviour, reaching for the toothbrush. The behaviour is rewarded. That taste of clean mouth, less visits to the dentist. So behaviours that are rewarded are repeated. You keep brushing your teeth because you get the reward. And pretty soon a very strong habit loop forms. Let's look at how this has worked for unhealthy eating. So you have a cue, your trigger. It might be an activity. So many people tell us, end of the day, sitting in front of the TV, real time for temptation. If you weren't born with this habit, but long ago, at some point, every now and then, when you sat in front of the TV, you reached for some ice cream, or it might be. You got a reward for that. Chemicals are released when we eat nice food. We get a dopamine hit. That's to guarantee that we'll keep eating the nice food when our body really needed those nutrients. Maybe you get a bit of distraction. Because you got that reward, that behaviour is repeated, so that now, before even thinking about it, TV means eating ice cream, and then you get the reward. Or the cue might be a feeling. So Feeling low or lonely, all of us go through this at different times. You may have found that eating something nice and sweet cheers you up a bit. Remember, we said the brain releases those calming feeling. So pretty soon, the feeling of being low becomes a trigger for that behavioural eating and getting that calming feeling. And you can see now why those habit loops are so hard to break because of those rewards you're getting. So it might be useful now just to take a pause, think about what your habit loop is. Think about the last time you ate something for any reason other than feeling physically hungry. You didn't have that empty feeling in your tummy. You just fancied something, you had a craving for something. Have a think about what the cue was. Was it a feeling, an activity, a social situation, a person? What was your behaviour? What did you eat or drink? And what reward did you get from it? Just jot that down. So you might now be asking yourself, well, what do we do about that? Is the answer to take away all of those bad habits? I'm suggesting the opposite. The answer, research shows us, is to actually harness the power of habit. Why? Because our brain loves habits. Willpower is actually a really limited resource. We run out of it. Whereas habit takes far less energy for the brain. It's estimated that up to 45% of our activities each day are habit. So what you want to do is learn how the habit forms, think about what purpose the habit is serving, and put something else in its place. And I'm going to give you some tips about this. And they all relate to the acronym RADAR. Here we go. So it might be that you try and replace the habit with a different one. It might be that you're going to avoid tempting stuff that isn't so good for you. Maybe you're going to delay indulging in the habit. Maybe you're going to make it easier, more accessible for you to stick to the good habit. Or maybe you're going to restrict the habit. I'm going to go through and explain those to you and have a think as I'm going through which might work for your life. Familiar scenario, reaching for those lovely salty, fatty chips. Have a think. What purpose are those chips serving you? This involves doing a bit of detective work next time you do the craving. What was going on for you in that moment? What were you really needing when you were reaching for the chips? Here's some ideas. So it may be that when you were reaching for those chips, and the quick satisfaction, that dopamine rush, what you really wanted was company. So maybe you could replace eating the chips with calling a friend. It may be, looking at the bottom three photos, what you were really needing is a bit of distraction, creative engagement. Doing things with your hands like woodwork or gardening or music are really good. First thing, most simply, it's hard to eat when both your hands are engaged. But also they get us in that creative engagement, that creative flow, and using all of our senses and the satisfaction of producing something at the end. It might be, looking at the cat at the top, that what you really need is some intellectual engagement. Maybe your brain is needing some stimulation. Where could you get that from? Watch something? Read something? Do a course online? Have a think about meeting that need. And lastly, top left-hand corner, and this is very common with lots of people, they find when they do their detective work that what they're really needing is rest. People often need to keep themselves awake, so maybe you could reward yourself with that rest instead. Just some ideas. Okay, another tip for changing your habits to something more positive. Avoiding the bad stuff. We are hugely influenced by our environments. If something's not immediately accessible in our environment, then often we won't go and seek it out. There's too many obstacles in the way. So put some obstacles in the way. If you want to have biscuits in the house, because now and then you want one, and that's okay on a balanced diet, make sure it's harder for you to get them. You could put them out of your eye line. I know some people who put them up high, so they have to get their house step ladder to go and get them. Or think about whether you need to buy them at all. Just think of ways that you can redesign your environment so it's harder for you to get that stuff that's not so good for you. So delay. I'm going to introduce something to you now that we call surfing the urge. When people have an urge for a food, they often feel that the only way to meet that is to give in, to eat the food. There's no other way that feeling will go away. But actually, research shows us that if you can surf it out, if you can wait, eventually the urge leaves of its own accord. You don't need to take any action. So it can take between 15 to 45 minutes for that urge to go. Ideally, distract yourself for that 45 minutes. But if that feels too hard at the moment, break it down, make it something easier. Just try delaying for 10 minutes. You may still eat that food at the end of those 10 minutes, but it's building up your resistance muscle. So the second A of radar, and we're talking here about accessible. Remember what I said about your environment. We're hugely influenced by what we can easily get hold of, or even just what we can see. So don't just have those healthy snacks in the cupboard. Get them out. Make them as easy to access as a packet of crisps. Have a box of the nuts or the fruit on your desk. If you've got plans to do a bit more activity, that's great. Think about making it as easy for you to do that. Have your walking shoes by the door. If you're trying the gym or golf or anything else that you need to get changed for, have that kit ready there by the door so that you can get into it quickly. I'm also thinking about accessibility in terms of what's achievable. So you'll have heard lots of discussion about the 10,000 steps being a really good target to aim for. And it is, but it's not manageable for all of us for all sorts of reasons. And if you fall into this category, you might be reassured to know there's also really good research that just 10 brisk minutes a day can help us. And you don't even have to do that all in one go. And here's a suggestion on how to help yourself do that. The NHS produced a brilliant app called Active 10, where you download it for free on your smartphone, stick your phone in your pocket, and it'll add up the number of brisk minutes you do across the day. You also get a little badge of achievement at the end. So you'll get that little reward, that little hit of dopamine. If you're thinking, well, it's all very well, but I don't have a smartphone, so how can I measure my brisk minutes? I've got another suggestion for you. So just wait a couple of slides. Okay, here, restrict. I'm not talking about restricting what you eat. It might be too hard at this stage. I'm talking about restricting where and when you do it. So going back to that eating in front of the TV, if you naturally reach for a packet of crisps, tell yourself you can still have those crisps. You might want to make a little rule about where and when you can have them. see what's right for you. So it might be all of my food has to be eaten at the dining room table. I can have it if I want it, but it has to be done at the dining room table. So next time you get the urge to eat the crisps in front of the TV, you turn off the TV, get up, go to the dining room table, eat the crisps, and then come back. Partly that's just about making that activity less pleasurable for yourself, but it's also about breaking the association between TV and crisps. And you'll be amazed at how powerful that can be. Okay, so the good spellers amongst you will have noticed I've chucked in an extra R, a cheeky extra R, and this relates to routine. We are all creatures of routine. We're much more likely to do something if it happens at the same time every day, and if it has an external cue. What I'm suggesting here is that you pair your helpful behaviour with something that you already do every day. For instance, most of us boil the kettle a few times a day, either at home or out in the office. It's a habitual thing to do. You could make a rule that each time you put the kettle on, you're walking up and down the kitchen briskly, or you're doing a few squats, or you're marching on the spot, or you're doing some air boxing, whatever works for you. Pretty soon, your brain will automatically be moving your body before you even know it once you've pressed that kettle on. And this could be a really helpful way, if you haven't got a smartphone, of making sure you're doing a certain amount of brisk activity each day. So what I'd really like you to do now is, and it might be helpful to actually write this down, just have a think back over radar, go back over the webinar if you need to, replace, avoid, delay, accessible, restrict, and the cheeky extra routine. And think about which one might work for you with your life circumstances. You know your life best, and you know yourself best. So take one that might work and jot down how you could try it over the next week. So we'd like to thank you for watching the first in our Psychology of Eating series. If you're thinking they've missed out a few things that I'd really find helpful, like dealing with slip-ups, and we all have them, whatever our good intentions, then we will be covering that in our second psychology webinar. And we'll also be covering mindful eating. And that's the I've Done It Again webinar. If you've got any other questions relating to diet or keeping yourself motivated, you're really welcome to get in touch with us at the email or telephone number below.